There's a secret about you that determines whether people respect you or manipulate you, whether they fear crossing you or feel entitled to test you, whether you control your life or spend it reacting to everyone else's agenda. And the most dangerous part? Most people reveal this secret freely, thinking they're building trust, being authentic, showing vulnerability. They have no idea they're handing out the blueprint to their own control. I'm going to expose something most people discover too late. The information you share about yourself isn't creating connection. It's creating access. Access to your decision-making, access to your emotional state, access to the pressure points that make you predictable. By the end of this presentation, you'll understand exactly what you must keep private, why revealing it makes you controllable, and how strategic concealment transforms you from someone who gets managed to someone who cannot be moved. This isn't about becoming secretive or paranoid. This is about understanding that in a world where everyone is collecting data on everyone else, the person who reveals nothing critical remains free. Let me ask you something that's going to reveal more than you expect. When was the last time you told someone about your plans before you executed them? Think about it. That project you were excited about, that decision you were considering, that change you were planning to make. You told someone, maybe a friend, maybe family, maybe a colleague, thinking you were sharing your vision, getting input, building support. What actually happened? They started asking questions that slowed you down. They raised concerns you hadn't considered. They planted doubts disguised as wisdom. They offered advice you didn't ask for. And somehow, your clear decision became clouded with their perspectives. This is the information trap. The belief that sharing equals trust, that transparency equals strength, that being understood equals being respected. None of that is true. Here's what's actually happening when you share information about yourself. People aren't listening to support you. They're listening to map you. They're collecting data points about what moves you, what stops you, what makes you react, what makes you reconsider. Niccolò Machiavelli observed this in the courts of Renaissance Italy, where information was currency and concealment was survival. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." But most people miss the tactical application of this wisdom. What you appear to be is shaped entirely by what you choose to reveal. And every revelation is a potential weapon in someone else's hands. Let me show you how this works in practice. You tell someone you're planning to change careers. Immediately, the dynamics shift. If they're in your current field, they take it as judgment of their choices. If they're not, they project their fears onto your decision. Either way, what was a private conviction becomes a public debate. Now you're defending your choice to people who have no stake in it, no understanding of your full context, and no authority over your life. But because you revealed your intention, you've unconsciously granted them permission to weigh in. You've invited them into your decision-making process. And here's the insidious part. Their doubts start living in your head. Not because they're right, but because human beings are wired to integrate social feedback. When someone you trust questions your decision, part of you starts questioning it too, even if the decision was sound. This is why powerful people never announce direction before arrival. They don't share their plans, their strategies, or their next moves. Not because they're secretive, but because premature revelation invites resistance that wouldn't exist otherwise. Think about military strategy. Generals don't announce their battle plans to the enemy. Why would you announce your life plans to people who might benefit from your failure, fear your success, or simply enjoy the leverage that comes from knowing your intentions? Sun Tzu wrote, "All warfare is based on deception. But the deepest deception isn't lying. It's allowing people to remain uncertain about your capabilities, your intentions, and your next move. When you reveal your plans, you remove that uncertainty. You make yourself readable, and readable people get intercepted. Let me give you another example. You tell your family you're saving money for a specific goal. Now, every time you spend money on something else, it becomes a point of discussion. I thought you were saving for X. They're not trying to help. They're measuring your discipline against your stated intention. Your private financial goal has become a public performance that others can grade. This is the information trap in action. The moment you externalize your internal processes, you invite external management of them. Marcus Aurelius, who commanded the greatest empire of his time while maintaining his philosophical discipline, understood this completely. He wrote in his private journal, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." But here's what he practiced that most people miss. He kept his struggles private. His journal wasn't published, it was discovered after his death. While alive, he revealed little about his internal battles, his doubts, his plans. He appeared as a finished product, not a work in progress. Why? Because revelation invites interference. When people see you struggling, they start offering solutions to problems you've already solved, advice on journeys you've already begun, warnings about risks you've already calculated. You're not getting support, you're getting noise. And noise drowns out the signal of your own judgment. Here's the brutal truth. Most people aren't asking about your plans because they care about your success. They're asking because knowing your plans gives them predictive power over your behavior. They can anticipate your moves, position themselves accordingly, and if necessary, create obstacles that serve their interests rather than yours. This isn't cynicism. This is realism. Human beings are competitive by nature. When you reveal your edge, you dull it. When you announce your advantage, you invite counters. When you explain your strategy, you enable resistance. The question isn't whether people are consciously trying to sabotage you. Most aren't. The question is, why give anyone the information they'd need if they decided to? Before we go deeper, I want you to pause and think about this. What have you revealed recently that you could have kept private? What decision did you justify when you could have simply made it? What plan did you explain when you could have just executed it? Every one of those moments was a leak, a small transfer of power from you to whoever was listening. Individually, these leaks seem harmless. Cumulatively, they're why you feel like your life is somehow negotiated with other people rather than directed by you. This is the information trap. The more you share, the more you have to manage other people's reactions to what you shared. You become a performer in someone else's evaluation system rather than the author of your own experience. And once you're performing for an audience, you've lost authorship. Now that you understand the information trap, let me show you how it translates into actual control over your life. There's a principle that operates in every human interaction, but most people never consciously recognize it: the leverage economy. In every relationship, every conversation, every negotiation, there's a balance of power determined by asymmetric information. The person who knows more about the other person has leverage. The person who reveals less about themselves maintains leverage. It's that simple and that brutal. Let me show you how this works with something specific. Your financial situation. Your income is nobody's business. Not your friends, not your extended families, not your co-workers. Yet people ask about it constantly, dress the question up in different ways, probe for indirect signals, and most people answer thinking transparency builds trust. It doesn't. It builds a calculation framework. The moment someone knows how much you make, the relationship fundamentally changes. If your income is higher than they expected, several things happen simultaneously. First, envy creeps in. They might not show it, might not even consciously feel it, but there's a recalibration happening. You've moved in their mental hierarchy, and humans don't like unexpected hierarchy shifts. Second, expectations adjust. Suddenly you're expected to pay more, contribute more, carry more of the load in shared expenses, not because you've agreed to, but because your revealed earning capacity makes it seem fair. Third, resentment builds when you decline requests. If they know you can afford something, your no becomes moral rather than practical. You're not saying you can't, you're saying you won't, and that makes you stingy in their minds. Now let's look at the reverse. If your income is lower than they expected, a different poison enters the relationship. Respect decreases. Your opinions carry less weight. Your decisions get questioned more frequently. Your capabilities are reassessed downward. Not because you've changed, but because the number attached to you has redefined you in their perception. Advice becomes condescension, concern becomes pity, support becomes charity. None of these dynamics existed before the number was revealed. The number created them. This is why powerful people never speak in numbers. They speak in ambiguity. I do well, it's comfortable, I manage. These phrases communicate nothing specific while satisfying social convention. Ambiguity forces people to guess, and when people are guessing about your resources, they're cautious. They don't know whether you have more to give or are stretched thin. They don't know whether you're indifferent to money or intensely protective of it. They can't calculate the optimal pressure to apply. This same principle extends to every form of resource you possess: time, attention, energy, skills, connections. The moment people know how much free time you have, they start assuming access to it. The moment they know you have a particular skill, they start treating your assistance as available rather than optional. The moment they know you're connected to someone influential, they start viewing you as a means to an end. You think you're being helpful by being transparent. You're actually teaching people what they can extract from you. Machiavelli observed that princes who revealed their full capabilities were immediately tested by those capabilities. If you demonstrate you can handle a particular burden, people feel entitled to place that burden on you. If you reveal you have particular resources, people feel justified in requesting access to them. The solution isn't lying about your capabilities. It's declining to inventory them publicly. I'm not sure I can help with that. That's not something I typically do. Let me think about whether that fits my schedule. These responses maintain ambiguity about your actual capacity while declining the implied obligation. Here's where it gets deeper. People use information about your resources to create artificial urgency. If they know you have money, financial emergencies happen near you. If they know you have time, crises develop that only you can solve. If they know you have connections, opportunities arise that require your introduction. None of this is coincidence. It's strategy, often unconscious strategy, but strategy nonetheless. Human beings are opportunistic, not in a cynical sense, in a survival sense. We're pattern-matching machines, constantly scanning for resources we can access. When you advertise your resources, you become a target for that pattern matching. The person who conceals their resources forces others to assume scarcity. An assumption of scarcity creates respect in a way that proven abundance never does. Think about this carefully. Who do you treat more carefully? The person you know will always be available, or the person whose availability is uncertain? The person you know has money to spare, or the person whose financial situation is opaque? The person who's eager to help, or the person who might decline? You treat uncertainty with more respect than certainty. Everyone does. This is why strategic concealment isn't about being difficult. It's about ensuring that your yes is valued because your no is credible. When people don't know your limits, they have to respect the possibility of limits. Let me give you a scenario that plays out constantly in professional environments. Two people have the same amount of free time. One person talks about how they're not too busy right now, or just finished a project. The other person never discusses their schedule at all. Who gets more additional work assigned? The person who revealed availability. Why? Because the manager knows one person has capacity and doesn't know about the other. The known quantity gets utilized. The unknown quantity gets assumed to be busy or protective of their time. Same capacity. Different revelation strategy. Completely different outcomes. This is the leverage economy in action. Every piece of information you reveal shifts the balance of power. Sometimes the shift is tiny, but thousands of tiny shifts over time create massive imbalances. You wonder why you feel overextended while others with similar capabilities don't. You wonder why requests always come to you first. You wonder why saying no feels so difficult. It's because you've revealed much for too long, and people have built their resource expectations around that revelation. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." But there's a deeper application. It is not the man who has too little to share, but the man who shares too freely, that is exploited. Here's what happens when you start applying strategic concealment to your resources. First, people stop assuming access. They start asking instead of expecting. That tiny shift in language represents a massive shift in power dynamic. Second, your boundaries become credible. When you say you can't help, people believe you because they don't have evidence to the contrary. When you say you don't have time, they accept it because they haven't been tracking your schedule. Third, the quality of requests improves. People who know they have to convince you rather than just access you bring better reasoning, more mutual benefit, and genuine respect for your decision-making authority. You become someone people approach with opportunities rather than obligations, collaborations rather than extractions, proposals rather than assumptions. None of this requires being rude or withholding help from people who genuinely need it and reciprocate appropriately. It simply requires you to stop advertising your full inventory of resources to everyone who asks. The person who controls information about their resources controls how those resources get requested, allocated, and valued. The person who reveals everything about their resources becomes a public utility, available, expected, and eventually resented for any moment of unavailability. Choose your position carefully. Because once you've established yourself as transparent, reversing that perception requires disappointing people who've grown accustomed to access you never actually owed them. Act 3. The emotional economy. Now we're going to examine something even more valuable than your material resources, your emotional architecture, the patterns of what affects you, what moves you, what destabilizes you. This is where most people lose control without ever realizing it was taken. Let me show you how this works. You tell someone what bothers you. Maybe it's being ignored. Maybe it's feeling disrespected. Maybe it's being questioned in public. You share this thinking you're establishing boundaries, communicating needs, building understanding. What you've actually done is handed them a user manual for controlling you. Here's what happens next. The exact thing you said bothers you starts happening with increasing frequency. Not always overtly. Sometimes it's subtle. Messages take longer to return. Comments land just slightly wrong in front of others. Questions get raised at precisely the wrong moments. You start to notice the pattern. But when you bring it up, the response is always some variation of, "I didn't realize. You're being too sensitive. I was just joking." The plausible deniability makes you question whether it's intentional. But the pattern persists. And it persists because it works. Once someone knows what destabilizes you emotionally, they don't need to confront you directly. They can apply pressure indirectly. They can create the conditions that provoke your reactions, then respond to those reactions as if they're unreasonable. You're not in an argument about facts anymore. You're in an emotional chess game where your opponent knows exactly which pieces trigger which responses. Marcus Aurelius spent his life mastering this principle. He wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it." But here's the tactical application most people miss. If you never reveal what disturbs you, people can't use your disturbance against you. They're forced to deal with facts rather than feelings, logic rather than reactions. Let me give you specific examples of how emotional revelation becomes leverage. You mentioned that being left out bothers you. Suddenly, plans are made just slightly out of your earshot. Conversations pause when you enter rooms. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to trigger that discomfort you revealed. Now you're acting from insecurity rather than strength. You mentioned that you value punctuality and lateness frustrates you. People start arriving 5 minutes late to meetings with you. Not enough to justify a confrontation, just enough to keep you slightly irritated. You're now operating from a state of chronic low-level annoyance they created. You mentioned that public criticism embarrasses you. Challenges to your ideas start happening in group settings rather than privately. Again, nothing overtly hostile, just strategic timing that exploits the vulnerability you disclosed. This isn't paranoia. This is pattern recognition. Once you start watching for it, you'll see it everywhere. The human tendency is to probe for emotional weaknesses the same way we probe for physical ones, not maliciously, instinctively. We're social creatures constantly calibrating status relationships. Emotional reactions are data points in that calibration. When you reveal what affects you emotionally, you're providing high-quality data. You're telling people exactly where to apply pressure to get specific responses. Machiavelli understood this dynamic completely. He wrote about rulers who revealed their fears became targets for those exact fears. Enemies didn't create new problems. They amplified existing ones they knew would provoke the desired emotional state. If a ruler feared betrayal, suggestions of disloyalty would be planted. If they feared incompetence, their decisions would be questioned. If they feared embarrassment, public tests would be created. The ruler's revealed psychology became the weapon used against them. The same principle operates in modern social dynamics. Your revealed triggers become tools others use to manage your behavior. Here's the part that's hardest to accept. This happens in close relationships too. Not because people are evil, but because emotional leverage is the easiest form of influence. When you know what upsets someone, you can control interactions by either avoiding that trigger when you want cooperation or deploying it when you want compliance. Think about arguments you've had. Notice how often they escalate not through logic, but through emotional pressure applied to known weak points. The moment someone says something that hits exactly the right nerve, you're no longer debating the issue. You're defending against the emotional impact. That's control. And it's only possible because at some point you revealed where the nerves are. The solution isn't emotional suppression. It's emotional privacy. There's a profound difference between not feeling things and not broadcasting what you feel. You can be affected by something without demonstrating that effect. You can have boundaries without explaining why they exist. You can have strong feelings without making them legible to everyone around you. Epictetus taught, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." But the most powerful extension of this principle is, never reveal the full extent of what is in your power, because revealed power invites targeted resistance. When people don't know what affects you emotionally, they can't calibrate their behavior to exploit it. They're forced to interact with you based on observable responses rather than predicted triggers. This is why composure isn't just a personality trait. It's a defensive strategy. When your emotional state remains opaque, people don't know whether they've affected you or not. That uncertainty forces them to be more cautious. Let me show you what changes when you implement emotional concealment. First, manipulation attempts fail more often. When someone tries to guilt you, anger you, or embarrass you into compliance, and your reaction doesn't match their prediction, they lose confidence in their ability to influence you. Second, conflict stays cleaner. Arguments remain about issues rather than deteriorating into emotional warfare. Without access to your triggers, people have to actually address your positions rather than just destabilizing you. Third, respect increases organically. People instinctively respect those they can't easily move. When your emotional state doesn't shift in predictable ways based on their behavior, you become someone who requires more careful handling. Now, here's the critical distinction. This doesn't mean becoming cold or robotic. It means becoming selective about emotional transparency. Close relationships built on mutual trust and respect can include appropriate emotional vulnerability. But that vulnerability should be proportional to demonstrated trustworthiness over time, not freely given to anyone who asks how you're feeling. The default should be privacy. The exception should be strategic, chosen vulnerability with people who've earned it. Most people operate in reverse. They're emotionally transparent by default and only become guarded after they've been hurt. But by then, the damage is done. The information is out there, being used, and reversing that revelation requires rebuilding your emotional presentation from scratch. Here's the practice. When someone asks what bothers you, what frustrates you, what scares you, pause before answering. Ask yourself, does this person need this information to interact with me appropriately, or are they gathering intelligence? Most of the time, it's the latter, and most of the time you can deflect with something vague. I prefer direct communication. I value consistency. I appreciate respect. These statements communicate standards without revealing specific triggers. They establish expectations without providing manipulation blueprints. The person who masters emotional privacy doesn't become less human. They become harder to control. And in a world where emotional manipulation is the primary form of social influence, being hard to control is freedom, the final truth. If you remember nothing else from this entire presentation, remember this. The things about yourself that you freely reveal become the handles people use to steer you. Every handle you remove is a degree of freedom you reclaim. Most people will never understand this principle. They'll continue broadcasting their intentions, advertising their resources, displaying their triggers, showcasing their loyalties, and defending their identities. They'll continue being managed by anyone who takes 15 minutes to listen carefully to what they reveal. You now have the knowledge to operate differently, to move through the world as someone who can't be easily read, predicted, or controlled through your own disclosures. The question is, will you implement it? Or will you continue doing what you've always done, explaining yourself to people who don't need explanations, justifying decisions to people who have no authority over them, revealing vulnerabilities to people who haven't earned that access? The choice is yours, but understand that it's a choice, not a personality trait, not an innate characteristic. A conscious decision about how much access you grant to the information that determines whether others can control you. Silence isn't emptiness. It's power in reserve. Strategic concealment isn't deception. It's operational security. Privacy isn't isolation. It's protection of the self from those who would use self-knowledge against you. When you master this, you don't become cold or distant. You become unmovable. And unmovable people live on their own terms in ways that transparent people never can. This is the forbidden knowledge. The most powerful position is the one where others must accommodate your uncertainty rather than you accommodating their certainty about you. Claim that position. Guard that position. Never surrender it for the temporary comfort of being understood by people who don't matter. Your autonomy depends on it. If this exposed something you've been living with without realizing it, write this in the comments. I control my information. Share this with someone who keeps revealing too much and wondering why they keep getting controlled. Subscribe if you're done being an open book in a world full of readers looking for weaknesses.